Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. It's a secular celebration of America, and as an immigrant, I feel I have much to be grateful for. Plus, I'm an optimist who tends to see the story of this country as one of making progress over the long run. Lately, it's been tough to maintain that sunny outlook. America's greatest asset, its constitutional republic and its democratic character, seem to be in danger of breakdown. Listen to the language of the president.
Our radical Democrat opponents are driven by hatred, prejudice, and rage. They want to destroy you, and they want to destroy our country as we know it.
Words like treason and coup are now casually tossed around in normal political discourse. Some had imagined that the impeachment inquiry might provide evidence and facts that would cut through the spin and fantasies, but in fact, the opposite has happened. Can America survive through such poisonous times? Well, in the past it has. It has survived the battles between slave owners and abolitionists, the first Red Scare and McCarthyism, Vietnam and Watergate. Could this time be different? Alas, yes, says Yoni Applebaum in a thought-provoking essay in The Atlantic titled How America Ends. Applebaum argues that the United States is undergoing a transition perhaps no rich and stable democracy has ever experienced. Its historically dominant group is on its way to becoming a political minority, and its minority groups are asserting their co-equal rights and interests. He acknowledges that there have been smaller versions of this transition before, but those moments have been wrenching, often stretching America to the breaking point. It took a civil war to end slavery, and then almost 100 years of struggle to end Jim Crow. The United States passed the Chinese Exclusion Act and interned 120,000 Japanese Americans before opening its gates to immigrants from all over the world. Coupled with demographics is one more worrying trend that threatens America's constitutional character: the ever-expanding power of the presidency. Whatever you think of the charges against Donald Trump on Russia or Ukraine, his position of resolute non-cooperation with Congress in the impeachment inquiry should trouble you deeply. If Congress cannot exercise its core constitutional oversight capacity, the presidency will have become an elected dictatorship. We've been going down this road for a while. Arthur Schlesinger wrote about the imperial presidency in 1973. The legislation and culture after Watergate led many to believe that matters were under control. In fact, as Schlesinger noted in a 2004 reissue of his book, in recent years the presidency has become stronger than ever. The furor after 9/11 proved to be the gateway for an out-of-control executive branch. The president gained the ability to snoop on private Americans, use military force at whim, torture prisoners, and detain people indefinitely. The President of the United States can now order the execution of American citizens who are deemed by him to be terrorists without due process. Attorney General Bill Barr believes, despite all this history, that the great problem in America is the presidency is too weak. He has enabled a policy of stonewalling and silence in which top administration officials behave almost as if Congress does not exist. People often ask what the founders would think of America today. It seems to me that the greatest shock to them would be the incredible growth of presidential power. Profound demographic change, fierce political backlash, and a presidency that refuses to be checked. My optimism is wearing thin this Thanksgiving. For more, go to cnn.com/Fareed and read my Washington Post column this week. And let's get started. Extraordinary is an overused word in the modern vernacular, but I don't think it's hyperbole to say we are living in extraordinary times in the United States. And I often wonder how historians 20 or 30 or 50 years from now will view this moment. Well, that's unknowable for now, but what is knowable is how historians are looking at it. As it happens, joining me are Doris Kearns Goodwin, a foremost historian of the American presidency. Her latest book is Leadership in Turbulent Times. She has a masterclass available on presidential history and leadership, available on masterclass.com. Rick Perlstein is a historian of the American conservative movement and in particular, a chronicler of the presidency and resignation of Richard Nixon. And you may know David Rubenstein as a billionaire businessman. He is the co-founder of the Carlyle Group, but one of his great passions is American history. And he's just published a book called The American Story: Conversations with Master Historians. Before we begin, David, I want you to explain what your book is and how it's really came out of an act of educating American congressmen about the country's history.
I have a concern that people don't know as much about our history as they should. Recently, in a survey, 3/4 of Americans could not name the 3 branches of government, and only 1/3 could name even one branch of government. So it's a sad situation. We don't teach history as much as we used to, or civics. And members of Congress are in the same category. They know more than the average citizen, but they should know more than probably they do, and they want to know more. So I started a series about 6 years ago at the Library of Congress to interview our great historians like Doris Kearns Goodwin in front of members of Congress. Now done about 50 of them, and I've taken about 18 of them, put them in a book, distilled the interviews a bit, edited them a little bit, and it's really designed to give people a look at American history through the eyes of the greatest historians we have, talking about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, FDR, and so forth.
Rick Perlstein, let's get to the substance. You wrote this great book about the end of the Nixon presidency, Invisible Bridge. And you point out, when we think about the impeachment hearings, there was a lot more going on with Nixon than just the impeachment hearings. Describe the kind of breadth of the investigation.
Well, by the time Nixon resigned, what the public referred to when they said Watergate was this panoply of sins that really went back to the beginning of his presidency. It was 1969 when he did his first phone tappings of his own staff because he was so terrified about leaks. In 1970, one of the things the investigation in 1973 found out was that he approved a memo recommending break-ins of his opponents. Right? He unapproved it, but obviously there were break-ins of his opponents. Watergate, the burglary, was followed by payoffs with secret funds to the burglars. But even as they were investigating all this, they would turn over rocks and turn over rocks and turn over rocks, and each rock would reveal, another thing. Nixon using public funds for his private residences.
And all this was discovered through not just one impeachment inquiry, right?
It was, of course, the media and Seymour Hersh and Woodward and Bernstein, but it was also in 1973 the Senate voted with only 2 votes in opposition to have a special committee that would investigate Nixon and have public televised hearings. And they were galvanizing. And one of the reasons only 2 people voted against it was they were approved at a time when no one could have imagined that the White House was involved.
You lived through that period, and what is your sense when you look at that impeachment and this one? What are the differences? What are the similarities?
Well, I think, the main difference when you think about it is that when those impeachment hearings started, only 19% of the country thought he should be impeached. And then you watch that process unfold, and they educated public sentiment,
right.
Both the events and the hearings and the discoveries. By the end, 57% thought he should be impeached. And then that great moment that you know so well about, you both do, when finally, the day before he resigns, Barry Goldwater and a couple other Republicans come to tell him what the situation is. And he's wondering, can I get 34? Maybe I'll get 20. Right. And Goldwater says, there's only 4, and I'm not one of them.
Right. And this
it's
was
an
one
incredible
of the differences.
moment.
It wasn't this small compartmentalized thing. Now they're going after this one bad thing he did, not this is how Trump does bad things.
But the key at that time, I think, was that the Republicans decided in the House Judiciary Committee to vote in favor of an impeachment articles.
That's right.
And right now, it seems as if it's very split by party lines. So Nixon was unable to hold the Republican Party in the House, and ultimately unable to do so in the Senate. Today, it appears that the president is able to hold his Republican Party.
And which shows that the big challenge, I think, is that they have to educate public sentiment about what is an abuse of power, what does it mean to violate the rule of law, what is bribery, what is an impeachable offense, why are we impeaching him now versus waiting for the election. All those kinds of that's what Lincoln said, with public sentiment, anything is possible. Without it, nothing is.
And
that country was educated under Nixon, and it came out fine in the end. Ford said our national nightmare is over, and there was a consensus in the country.
Why is that happening? Presumably, the reason the Republicans are doing this is because they recognize that Trump has the base of the party, has the entire party with him, that if they were to break with Trump, they would lose their primaries, they would be primaried, they would lose election. So Is it that the country is so much more polarized that there's simply no prospect of
I think that
50-50
polarization is a very poor metaphor. You hear it all the time. The Democratic Party, loves bipartisanship. We nominate a guy, I'm going to say I'm sorry, maybe a little too partisan, who says there is no red America, there is no blue America. Or a guy in 1988 who says this election is not about ideology, it's about competence. But in these 4 books I've written, I'm writing about the surrender of a party to almost authoritarianism, turn by turn by turn by turn. I can tell that story if you're interested. But the fact is we're at a point now at which basically the things that would get a Republican, there was something called the John Birch Society. You guys will all remember that. There were
I'm afraid
crazy
we're old enough to
conspiracists,
remember
right?
that.
And they said, Eisenhower is a conscious agent of the communist conspiracy. Back in the early 60s, you had to disavow the John Birch Society in order to be taken seriously in the party.